The number 4 Alabama arrived in Madison, Wisconsin, and took the Badgers to the woodshed yesterday. But are there some issues with the Tide that you should be worried about as they move into SEC play? Stick around. This is Way Offsides. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever the case may be. Welcome to the morning after Way Offsides. The morning after the Alabama Crimson Tide went to Madison, Wisconsin and destroyed the Badgers of the Big Ten there in Madison, and amongst all the fans and friends at Alabama who traveled for the game, highlighting how wonderful Madison was and how great their fans were. The team on the field took no prisoners, showed no mercy, and destroyed the Badgers 42-10. There's a lot we can take away from this game, and we're going to get into all of it. And while we do that, we're going to highlight some footage here via courtesy of Fox Big Noon Saturday. Alabama looked like the Alabama that we expected them to look like against Wisconsin. It wasn't always pretty. It wasn't always fast. It wasn't even always efficient. But they did what they needed to do. They covered. But what really happened on the field in Wisconsin? Let's start with the negatives. Let's get those out of the way because I don't want to just focus on the negative things, but I do want to talk about realistically what happened on the field in Wisconsin. Offensively, Alabama sputtered. They came out the gate sputtering. We expected that to happen. 11 o'clock kickoffs, especially on the road, are like that, right? But considering that Alabama's offense has not been super efficient in the first 2 weeks going into Madison, we wanted to see more consistency in sustaining long drives down the field. Alabama is a very explosive offense. They made sure you knew that. It was said over and over again, right? Alabama, I believe, Alabama ran a total of 56 plays compared to 72 by Wisconsin. They scored 42 points on 56 plays, which means they were scoring on big-time plays, right? That looks good on paper. It does. It's great because you need an offense to be explosive. But long-term, you need an offense who can also sustain drives and keep the ball away from the other team's offense. And Alabama's going to find themselves in positions where they need to do that. Tennessee is going to be a great example of that. Tennessee is a high-flying offense who Alabama will play this season in Knoxville. And Alabama's offense will have to sustain drives on the ground to keep that offense off of the field and let their defense rest. Now, how do you do that? You run the ball. Well, what do you need to run the ball? You need a running back. What else do you need? An offensive line. And luckily for Alabama, they have their offensive line. Caden Proctor finally played and made his re-debut at Alabama, and then they started Elijah Pritchett over on the right side. And Alabama did a great job on the ground. A great job. They rushed for just under 200 yards. They gave Milroe beautiful pockets the entire game. He threw for 226. Well, ultimately, the team threw for 226, but Milroe accounted for almost 200 yards of that. I believe it was 196 yards and 3 touchdowns through the air. He had that one beautiful touchdown to Hollywood Ryan Williams, and then he had another beautiful touchdown to Jeremy Bernard. And then he had the one down the seam to Josh Cuevas, which was absolutely beautiful. But those plays are great. But, Alabama scored a lot off of short fields yesterday in Madison. And yes, you want to take advantage of a short field and you want to score points, but you also want to control the game on the ground, and extend long drives. Wisconsin was able to do that a couple of times in the game and march all the way down the field. They did it once in the first quarter, once in the third quarter, one time settling for a field goal. And the other time they scored, I think they had a 17-play, 75-yard drive against Alabama. Alabama needs to be able to do the same thing when they move into SEC play in 2 weeks. So offensively, that's what I saw that bothers me. right? On top of that, Jalen Milroe struggled a little bit early to read and hit some passes. He was a little jumpy. He's been doing that a little bit this season. And he takes a minute to settle into the game. I think Milroe might be a victim of external noise because he hears all of us all the time. But listen, Jalen Milroe is fine. He is doing fine. Best deep ball in the country. Most beautiful deep ball in the country. You saw it on display, that 55-yard touchdown pass to Jeremy Bernard. I don't think it was 55 yards, but you get what I'm saying. It was a big touchdown pass to Jeremy Bernard. Either way, Jeremy Bernard had 55 yards altogether. Milroe is getting much better in terms of reading his progressions when the offensive line is giving him the time. We've talked a lot in the offseason about how Milroe has to trust his offensive line. He hasn't had a big chance to grow in that department over the last 2 weeks because it's been this stick together, copy and paste, well, not copy and paste, but glued together offensive line experience. And Milroe's been under a lot of pressure. He's been sacked a lot. He's held onto the ball a little bit too long. And let's be honest, the play calling wasn't spectacular yesterday in Madison. Nick Sheridan, I don't know if that's by design, if they're trying to keep it vanilla, or if that the offense just isn't ready to open it up. Either way, Nick Sheridan didn't wow anybody with the offensive playbook yesterday. But you can watch, if Milroe gets the time, he is going through those reads. Once he gets comfortable, calms himself down in the game, and he's hitting them, right? We've seen that to Ryan Williams a couple of times this year, that touchdown pass to Josh Cuevas. He's going to be fine. Milroe is the guy, right? He's the most dangerous player on the football field whenever they play anybody on both sides of the ball, on both teams, okay? So that's what I saw negative defensively. Now, offensively. Now, positive offensively, Alabama's offensive line showed out yesterday, putting in Proctor and putting, everybody's in their right place. Everybody's where they're supposed to be. And you could immediately see it mesh. That one Jam Miller touchdown run was huge. They were opening up holes, man. I think Alabama ran for, let's see how many yards they ran for on the ground. Altogether, Alabama ran for just under 200 yards on the ground, 181 yards, right? That was on a total of, looks like just around 30 carries. Okay. Now, Jalen Milroe was the leading rusher. He had 14 carries for 75 yards, 2 touchdowns. Jam Miller came in right behind him at 9 carries for 71 yards. That's an 8-yard per carry average for Jam Miller. The offensive line did their job. They did their job, not just in the run game, but in pass pro as well. They gave Milroe time. He went 12 for 17. He only threw the ball 17 times for just under 200 yards for 3 touchdowns. So on the offensive side of the ball, we are seeing the progression we need to see, especially considering it's an 11 o'clock game on the road up north in a place that Alabama does not typically travel to play. So what about defensively? What happened defensively in this game? A couple of things. We'll go to the positives first. Alabama, a lot of the times when it comes to takeaways, the potential is there, right? Alabama's not blowing their turnover margin out of the water. It's not spectacular, especially after they turned it over a few times last week. But in terms of defensive players getting their hands on the ball, it's happening. Now they have to hit a home run there. They have to finish those. I think 5 or 6 different times Alabama had realistic opportunities for interceptions yesterday, and they dropped them. Keon Sabb had one. A couple other guys had them. So Alabama has to capitalize on those opportunities because with better quarterbacks, that's not going to come, right? I know everybody watched the Georgia-Kentucky game last night. Georgia struggled. They struggled to run the ball, right? But Carson Beck, whether you like him or not, I still believe that if Carson Beck gets pressured, he's kind of mid. But when he's got a nice, clean pocket, he looks elite, right? He's not going to give Alabama the opportunity to pick those balls off if Alabama can't get past pressure on it. So that's where the defense looked good. Fast, aggressive, as always. I would have loved to see Tyler Van Dyke stay in that game and see how they worked because Van Dyke, obviously the game plan very early was clear. They were going to move him out of the pocket and make Alabama run sideline to sideline. I think Alabama probably would have struggled with that for just a little bit until they made a couple of adjustments and they kind of figured out what Wisconsin was going to do. But with Jihad Campbell and Deontay Lawson, who are 2 of the best sideline to sideline linebackers in the country, I believe they would have been fine, right? So the big glaring issue, two of them that we've seen with Alabama's defense, Wisconsin, once Tyler Van Dyke went out of the game, they made the decision that they were going to test Alabama up front, right up the middle, right? And they did. They like I said, in the third quarter, they had one drive that was probably 17 plays. They went 75 yards, 75 yards, and the majority of it was on the ground, and Alabama could not stop it. They could not stop it. Ultimately, altogether, they ended up only rushing for 150 yards, which doesn't sound good, but the bulk of that came on two drives. The first drive of the game where they went down, kicked a field goal, and then that drive in the third quarter where they went down and scored. So Alabama's defense has only given up 2 or 3 touchdowns this season so far in 3 games, in 12 quarters of football. So they're not looking terrible. They're not looking bad at all. They're very fast. They're very aggressive. Now, the big problem that a lot of us are talking about and starting to see that people who maybe aren't watching the entire play aren't seeing is there's a lot of coverage bust in the secondary. We knew this was going to be a problem. This is a very young secondary. The guys who aren't young outside of Malachi Moore have come from other destinations. We've told you guys that they would need time to kind of mesh and get used to each other, right? And so that's kind of what we're seeing happen live in game. But the secondary, Wisconsin, a lot of the times in this game, the secondary, there were guys open. They just didn't have a quarterback who could hit them. Later on in SEC play, there's going to be quarterbacks who can and will hit those. And you saw it. It was the same thing with USF last week. And there were some against Western Kentucky too. We just haven't played a quarterback yet who can hit those. So obviously, if we see it, Coach DeBoer, Coach Womack, those guys see it too, and they're working to get it fixed. We told you guys leading up into the season it was going to be like this defensively for a couple of games. They had to kind of get their feet up under them, and how the schedule really set up nicely for them to do that. And so we'll see what it looks like in 2 weeks when Georgia comes to town. But ultimately, Alabama's right where they should be. They're one of the best top 5 teams in the country. They showed that by going up to Wisconsin and doing what they did. Even if Tyler Van Dyke stayed in the game, it would have been a lot of the same. And so Alabama fans have a lot to smile about. They didn't lose the Cal this week. They didn't almost lose to Kentucky this week. They went up to the Big Ten and came back with a 42-10 victory. So let us know. What were your thoughts on the game? Where can Alabama improve? Where are they doing great at? What are you happy with? What do you not like? What do you want to see different? While you're doing that, please be sure you're liking and subscribing to content, sharing with your friends, telling them about us. We want to grow this football season. We'll be doing the remonetization thing in November, so hopefully that'll help out with some of our low numbers lately. But we really count on you guys heavily to really pitch in and help us out. So please do that. But you guys know the drill. As always, say your prayers, read your Bibles, wash your hands, horns down, beat Auburn and LSU and Tennessee too. Roll Tide.